So I'm really delighted to be able to extend the conversation that I've just had with Ben, with my colleague Samreen McGregor. Samreen, I wonder if you could start by saying a few words about yourself and your interest in the coaching area and perhaps even, motivational interviewing.
Of course, Michael. It is so lovely to be here. What a great thing to be doing in the middle of my day, although it's towards the end of your day. So I'm Samreen, and I have spent, gosh, the best part of about 25 odd years working in this whole sort of area of helping leaders to propel themselves, to connect closer to who they are and to the relationships around them. My work as an executive coach and over the years, an executive consultant and organizational behavior specialist, has really worked at a very, very special cross section, certainly special to me. One is strategic business performance and some of the harder aspects relating to the tangibility of how a business drives performance, but how leaders play a role in that. The secondly, and this is probably the closest bit of my passion over the last 20 odd years, and that's the deep behavioral change and the deep understanding of self and awareness. And I've got a psychotherapeutic background and a neuroscientific background. And what spans across both of those areas, strategic business performance and deep behavioral change, is a really sort of bigger picture, a systemic approach, looking at, enabling leaders and teams to zoom out, to stand back and zoom out and see the whole picture. And rather than portion blame or trying to find specific causes, although causes are important to me in other respects, is to actually understand the interdependencies between what drives performance, behavior, dynamics in organizational context.
Mm,
But more recently, and this is a very, very sort of important part of the work I do, and it's become very close to my heart. I've dipped my fingers in, and now actually I'm certainly dipping my whole body into embodied consciousness. And in a world where over the last 5, 6 years we've become far more articulate and versed in our understanding of how external forces impact our inner selves and our sense of confidence, our sense of health and well-being.
mm,
This whole new area is something that I'm integrating into the coaching I do, both individually as well as in groups or team settings.
mm,
And it enables me to support leaders and organizations in finding, I don't know whether balance is always possible, but
mm,
a proportion between driving performance and desired outcomes from a business perspective
mm,
through to really protecting and preserving
mm,
good health.
mm. Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, this is, I think, the perfect connection point for an exploration of motivational interviewing. And as I was discussing with Ben, um, we came to a sort of conclusion in a way that motivational interviewing was a really useful tool that would be part of, if you like, a very rich toolkit for coaching. And in terms of reflecting on where motivational interviewing might be particularly useful, I was coming at it from the point of view of trying to help, let's say, individuals who are running into trouble because they are perceived as being very abrasive, for example. Perhaps their relationships with other people are fractious in the way that maybe they don't understand the impact that they're having on others. And so that sort of notion of how do we encourage somebody, how do we motivate somebody to even think about changing some of those behaviors which are variously characterized as being toxic behaviors. And so I was kind of wondering, thinking back to many years ago when I was at first interested in motivational interviewing, would there be a way to harness some of the techniques or characteristics of motivational interviewing such that they could be usefully deployed in conversations with people where people are potentially denying that there's even a problem.
Mm,
And so that was something that I thought was, really interesting to kick around. And maybe just to sort of lay a few other sort of points out in front of you and then invite your reflections on it. Um, the thing that really appeals to me about motivational interviewing is that it's very, very strongly anchored in empathy and compassion.
mm,
And it's extremely important that the conversations that are had are imbued with that sense of being non-judgmental, because some of the things that you might be hearing are potentially very challenging. So
mm,
that was one of the things that really, really interested me about motivational interviewing, and also just this notion of being very neutral as an interlocutor, not trying to necessarily manage anybody or necessarily guide anybody, but just to sort of be there as a support person. And I wonder whether um, there are parallels with what you might call mainstream coaching that we could readily identify. And maybe from your own practice, maybe you've actually been doing motivational interviewing in a sense, even within your own practice now. So I'm curious just to sort of hear what you think about, the way that perhaps we can use motivational interviewing, which has its genesis in a clinical and counseling
mm.
those areas, but transposing that into, the world of leadership development. That's sort of what I'm quite curious to understand a bit better, really.
I love it. Love the questions, love the proposition, and also just the timelessness of this technique and approach that absolutely has its roots in more clinical context, but is so relevant today and shares, I guess there's three or four things that I'm hearing you highlight here. One is and it's no surprise to you that I'm going to start here, the reality that actually the behaviors, the potentially some of the um, tendencies and patterns that might be stemming from perhaps a psychoanalytical perspective might suggest from defense
Yes.
mechanisms that our
Hmm.
brains are so incredibly astute and unconsciously clever at
Mm,
using,
mm,
like denial and avoidance. And
yes.
even when actually we might experience tension and conflicts.
Mm,
And a lot of my
mm,
clients will say, I didn't like how I felt. In fact, I felt a
mm,
level of shame or,
mm,
dissatisfaction in that
mm,
interaction.
mm.
Yet when we then start to break it down and
Hmm.
create an environment where I help them to face into
Yeah.
why that may have been the case and what their personal role in that may have been. It's hard. It's hard because
Mm,
I
mm.
think one of the things that you highlight there is the reality is it's stemming and it's rooted in something that perhaps may have come from the past.
Yeah.
And you and I do a lot of research into toxicity, so there's a whole trauma conscious piece here
Mm,
that for me
mm,
is, and we could talk a little bit about
mm,
trauma. And the other thing that you talk about is the appreciative, non-judgmental context. And for me, this is all about what drives us and encourages us to want to look in the mirror, to want to go deeper, to want to actually accept and embrace the need for change or the need for enhancing how we might do something, how we might see something.
mm.
And that requires safety.
Yeah. Yeah.
And motivational interviewing is, again, based on an understanding that humans need a sense of safety and
Mm,
security
mm.
to truly engage with something that might disrupt us or
Yeah.
disrupt what we're already doing. So that's the second thing. And I think the third thing that you highlight there is the compassion and the empathy, which again speaks to both of the first that stood out for me. The first being it's the adversities within our lives
Mm,
that may lead to, and some of them are very, very explicit, some of them are less explicit, some of them are acute, big moments that happen in our lives,
mm,
and some of them are actually more chronic and more subtle,
mm.
but all of which shape who we are
Yeah.
in the present. So our clients and ourselves, by the way, this is why I keep using the word we, because we're all human, aren't we? And none of us, we're all on a learning journey. None of us are perfect or
Definitely.
So all of this applies to all of us, but I think our clients tend to require spaciousness to just
Hmm.
step back and have a
Mm,
sense. Motivational interviewing enables that safe container,
mm,
that space where, in a non-judgmental way, it's a bit like I love the concept of containment, where the mother is holding the infant
mm,
after the infant comes out into the world.
mm,
And has left the cocoon of safety, which was
mm,
within the body,
mm,
and now is suddenly needing some sort of replication of those conditions.
mm,
And it's just in the eye gaze of the mother with the
mm,
infant.
mm,
And for me, that context of motivational interviewing
mm.
is trying to emulate a version of containment
Yeah,
so that I'm
lovely,
not judging you. I'm
lovely.
asking you questions that enable you to just engage at your pace, at
Mm,
your rhythm,
mm,
to some of those things that might be necessary to examine, to
mm,
explore,
mm.
to look at our connections with others, and for you to understand how your relational piece needs to
Yes,
also be explored and questioned.
yes,
And then to start going deeper into some of the tensions and the conflicts and the resistance and all these aspects that are infused in our relationships.
yes, yes. Lovely. I mean, I love that idea of creating. I think sometimes in our world, people talk about creating a space, don't they, where they feel
Mm,
safe to explore the way that they really feel and the way that they're interacting with the world. And that container that you mentioned, love the analogy with the baby and then the newborn baby and being held by the mother. I think that's something that, if we're able to, I don't know, bottle that kind of. I won't call it magic, but that moment, if you like, in terms of our leadership, it sounds to me like it could be just a wonderful antidote,
mm,
some of the toxicity that we're facing, well, broadly in our world today, but that exists, as we know, in an organizational context. And wouldn't it be great to be able to help people to be able to approach, conflict, in a much less confrontational way? Because we
mm,
know that seldom ends well. And if we can help people to sort of find a way forward that encourages or increases the possibility for a positive outcome, then I think that would be great. Whether it's motivational interviewing that can help with it, whether it's sort of broad-based, excellent coaching that can help with that,
mm,
I'm not sure. But you mentioned about trauma. You also mentioned about, and I know that you're doing a lot of work with breath work.
mm.
Maybe just to sort of wrap things up a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in that area? Perhaps just paint a picture for us, and then we can see maybe that motivational interviewing could connect rather nicely with that. But I'll leave the final word to you, Samreen.
Absolutely. No. And I think, there's such a thread here. It's such a clear and consistent thread. And the two words that I didn't mention, by the way, that I didn't, as you were coming back to me, I thought, well, I forgot to say that compassion and the empathy are the conditions in our current life that enable us to gain that containment. So this, and I think that's the bridge to the
Mm,
answer here that I want to give you. So
yes.
I've been doing a lot of coaching in a space where my psychotherapeutic background provides that love, that container, that safety, that
Mm,
ability to just, be and
mm,
not have to, prove and not have to justify. And the last 4 or 5 years, I've really immersed myself in understanding the role of adversity in our lives. Interesting, conflict is one of them. Okay, even though they're conflicts are things that we experience quite regularly, although it's quite adversarial, isn't it? It's
hmm
combative.
hmm
But actually we need conflict. We need
We do.
resistance.
Hmm.
If you think about just the world of nature, when a sapling and a seedling, sprouts,
Absolutely.
it needs that resistance and needs that conflict of energy and forces. And the trick is to create conditions for us to disagree,
Yeah.
actually to have that sense of, you know, um, conflicting energy, and then to find ways
Yeah.
to constructively work through that
Mm,
together.
mm,
Now, adversity, trauma, conflict, all these different sort of, you know, darker
hmm
topics
mm,
or unwanted energies and forces,
mm,
uh, often certainly in my experience and more recently in my research, are stemmed with associations of things that we think don't serve us well.
mm,
When I personally had a very sort of personal experience, a very difficult experience over the last 8 years, and my son had cancer,
mm,
and I learned through that process that actually adversity is
mm,
a real route for growth.
mm,
Um, Now, of course, I wouldn't choose to go through the journey we went through. And by the way, he's
mm,
thankfully healthy now
mm.
and in a good
Yes.
place. But it was one hell of an adversarial situation. It was
Mm,
very difficult, but it awakened me, and it opened up this sort of lid
yes.
around how do these experiences, whether they stem from childhood,
Hmm.
whether they're during our formative years, and there are
Hmm.
various ones, between 10 months and 7 is the core childhood, but we then have a
Mm,
whole adolescent phase.
yes.
We have our professional early years.
Mm,
We have our sort of mid years, which is being redefined all the time at the moment, intergenerationally. Now, my
indeed.
sense is that it's through these experiences that we grow, but there is a significant difference between what happens in our conscious, explicit perspective and sense of awareness and sense of self and what's happening at the deeper layers.
Mm.
And
Wow.
so it was only in the last few years that I discovered that there are some really deep processes. And
Mm,
the bridge for me, or the sort of the raft, was I started to do some somatic work in my coaching.
mm,
I bring into the coaching a sense of understanding, a sense of what's going on in our bodies.
mm,
Yesterday, I was actually in a conflicting situation, not explicitly, but I was finding myself conflicted, and I could feel this tension in my solar
mm,
plexus,
mm,
is just above my belly button.
mm,
And I am so now in tuned using the somatic practices I use that I knew that I needed to do something to
mm,
really, really soften
mhm,
that. And in our solar plexus, we hold our sense of control.
mhm,
I was feeling out of control. And rather than to say, right, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to try to challenge every assumption I'm making, I went for a walk and I didn't listen to music or anything. I
mm,
literally just tried to calm,
mm,
allowing. By the time I
mm.
came back, things had softened, hadn't
Wonderful.
resolved itself, but I felt different. And just to finalize my answer and really, really, I guess, punctuate the breath work, I hadn't realized just how much what we do second to second plays
Yeah.
a part, a really
Mm,
dominant part in
mm,
helping us to regulate our nervous system,
mm,
clarify our thoughts, and
mm.
actually release our emotions and even connect more deeply with who we are.
Yes.
And I had an experience a few years ago with my daughter who encouraged me to attend an event where it was a large event with lots of people doing breath work. I knew a little bit about it scientifically, so I was feeling some trepidation of her being 13. I, long story short, she won the argument. She said, "What's the worst that can happen, Mummy? We're just going to breathe." We went into it. We
Mm,
did it. I witnessed her. I actually was trying to keep sort of a bit of control over how shallow or how deeply I breathed. And I witnessed a total transformation in her.
mm, mm,
And having had years and years of therapy
mm,
uh, due to her brother's cancer journey
mm,
and the post-traumatic journey that she had personally also experienced through
mm,
abandonment because
mhm,
our attention was entirely on her brother.
mhm, mm,
uh, what came of that process in just
mm,
a few sessions made me realize just how on the surface I was working as a coach
mhm,
and in
mhm,
my psychotherapeutic background,
mm,
even near scientific background.
mm, mm, mm.
And I've now fully qualified into actually bringing breath work into the work that I
Super.
do. And I'm integrating it with leaders and actually running groups of breathwork sessions that
Super.
really support, but complementing it with that container,
Mm,
with a
yeah.
sense of self-awareness, not just
Mm,
going right, because there is a bit of a,
mm,
I guess, a risk that you do
mm,
this breath work and you're not actually structured and arriving at a process where you're able to integrate what
mm.
happens in that
Yes.
unconscious self.
Wonderful.
So I hope I've given a little bit of a taster of what it might be about, but there
Yes.
is an article that I've recently written about it that explains a lot more how I'm working
Mm,
with leaders and people within organizations around breathwork and leadership as well.
And so if people want to learn a little bit more and hear a little bit more, that's probably where they can go, and they'll probably be able to find that, I'm sure, on our
Yes,
website, on the Future Work Forum
yes,
website.
and it's been
Mm,
published in Coaching Today, so I'm sure we can add the details
excellent,
to
excellent,
this
very good.
episode.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, maybe just a couple of concluding remarks. Great to talk to you. As always, always great to hear your insights into coaching and the sort of very radical areas that you're working in. I think, it's a story that's going to run and run, don't you? It's sort of like whether it's motivational interviewing, whether it's coaching, whether it's breath work, there's always more to learn. And I think the key thing is to have conversations like this so that we can learn from each other and and hopefully, shift the needle a little bit more on our cumulative collective awareness about how great these things can be for the human condition. So
Absolutely.
so with
Yeah,
that,
I'm with you.
Samreen, I will thank you and look forward to catching up again very soon. So thank you for your time today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.